Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us today. Our topic is the mental health of our children and the role of social media. Our guest is Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein, who is a psychologist and author of Perseverance, How Young People Turn Fear into Hope and How They Can Teach Us to Do the Same. And also Dr. Rubenstein is a mother of two. So this situation certainly hits close to home. Dr. Rubenstein, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So the statistics are very disturbing. One that really jumped out at me was the CDC reported that 3 out of 5 teenage girls, so most teenage girls these days, reported persistent feelings of sadness. And this is up 60% since 10 years ago. So what's happened in the last 10 years that's caused these teenage girls to feel so sad?
I think there's a lot of factors that are really unique to this, the past 10 years when we think about the isolation that was kind of created through the pandemic, through not being able to see your friends in person, being out of classrooms, missing a lot of key events, right? So missing things like school dances, like graduation, things like that, that really impacted young girls that we're really looking forward to these pivotal moments. But I think one of the biggest things has been the rise of social media and the immediacy of some of the impacts of that can have on young women. And in particular, how they feel about themselves, how they compare themselves, and setting up some very unrealistic expectations.
So talk a little bit more about that comparison and how prevalent and how damaging really that is with social media, and also just how deceptive it is, because what these young girls are comparing themselves to isn't even real in most cases.
I know. And that's the hardest part. So what's interesting is not just the comparison to others, which is what's happening, right? They're seeing all of everyone they look up to, every celebrity and influencer. They're also seeing their friends, and, the people that are outside of their friend group through all of these filters and all of these different, unreal ways of looking at them. And they see that as real, though. Their brains don't have the ability, most of us don't have the ability to say, oh, that's filtered. We just see that as real. But then the other comparison that they're making is to themselves and their actual self versus this online filtered, unreal self, and feeling badly about themselves then when they look in the mirror and they're not seeing a filtered version. And so it's this really double whammy that we're getting.
And there was recent research that showed when teenagers stopped using social media, the way they felt about themselves, particularly their body image, improved. So that was sort of almost proof of how damaging social media is, at least when it comes to issues like body image.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think body image is one of the major places, that we're starting to see some real, impact, especially with all of the filtering that has been happening and all the apps that you can now use to, make yourself look like a completely different person.
And so we saw that not too long ago, a Facebook whistleblower, used to be an executive there and then became a whistleblower, showed that their own internal research showed that Facebook was damaging to young people. Can you sort of elaborate on some of the things that we've learned and that research has shown can be harmful towards children when it comes to social media?
Yeah, I think some of the main things that we've learned is, how much information that kids are getting, and it's unfiltered information. So this is information that is from a variety of sources and is usually filtered by their peers. And so it's coming through a lens that maybe they wouldn't normally get through their schools or, other leaders that they're following or their teachers or their parents. But it's coming through a very young, often immature lens. And so they're getting a very distorted view of reality through kind of this information, but also learning way too much that's not developmentally appropriate for their age through social media. That's another thing that we're seeing. I think also the key component that we always look at is the social impact, right? Of the bullying online, the cancel culture of if you do something that someone feels is skewed or incorrect, that you are pretty much bullied and ostracized. So there's so many different ways that this is now being taken in a negative direction that we have to be so careful about.
I've been hearing this phrase doom scrolling, and it
Yes.
looks like kids are doing this. Could you explain that, what that is?
Yeah, yeah, it's when you're on your phone, you're scrolling, you feel awful, and you're kind of looking for more that kind of confirms that feeling. So you are just kind of going down this dark hole, literally, on social media, and so you just keep going and going, and it's almost automatic. You don't even realize you're doing it, and it leaves you in a pretty icky, doom-like mental state, where nothing feels good, and it's pretty scary because your reality hasn't changed. Oh, the only thing that's changed has been where your attention has been.
Talk about how addictive social media can be.
I think like anything, it gives you that quick like dopamine burst. It gives you that reinforcement. If you put up something and you're getting likes and you're getting comments and you're getting that sense of, being seen, that can be very addicting, especially if you're not getting that in other areas of your life. So I think in particular, for people that don't have that in other areas, they're going to be really drawn to that those boosts of reinforcement and validation that you get from online that they don't get offline.
Oh, so those likes, that's sort of like a
Yeah.
dopamine hit.
Yes.
So can you drill down a little bit more about why it's so important for these kids to have likes?
I think that's validation for them. It's almost like they're how they now see social validation. And I think it's been, we've seen the impact of that. Instagram, for example, now has the ability you can hide in a lot of places where you hide the number of likes someone has. Because that has become almost a social metric for, well, this post, I didn't get as many likes, which means people must not like me as much, so taking it literally. And when it really doesn't mean that at all. But as children and even many adults, it can feel that way.
And you talked just a moment ago about this is particularly concerning for people who aren't having a lot of one-on-one interaction or might not be having a lot of healthy interaction in person with other people. Can you talk about the dangers of replacing interactions with people through social media with actual interactions with people in person?
Yeah,
Why it's different?
yeah, it is so different because online is not, you're going to miss so many parts of interacting with someone. You're only going to get kind of the external, it's almost people are very different online than offline, as we've seen. And, they take on a different persona. So you don't even know if the person you're interacting with is the same way they would be offline. And so what's really important is, it's okay to have those relationships online and those connections online, but you really want to make sure, that you have those offline as well. So you can see the difference and see how different and more fulfilling it is to have that kind of 360 experience with people in real life. And I think a lot of kids sometimes get so consumed with online that they don't actually get to experience that as much and don't really know the difference.
We know that children spend a lot of time online, but a lot of that is they have to be online because of school. Do we know how much time they're spending on social media?
I think it honestly varies by, parents and families. So a lot of, families are they don't allow their children to go on social media, aside from what they need to do for school. And some of the schools don't use social media. They'll use, their secure kind of online website or something like that. So it really does differ. But I think when you go to teenagers that have a lot more freedom, you see the numbers skyrocket and people are spending hours on social media, especially in the evening when they're alone. And that's where the parental environment, the family environment is so important to come into place and the norms and the expectations around it.
Well, it's a very disturbing situation and it keeps changing every day. And a lot of
It
parents aren't
does.
really up to speed on what's happening or what they can do. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with psychologist Carolyn Rubenstein to talk about what parents and even a broader society can do to mitigate the damaging effects of social
Mhm.
media on our mental health, on our children's mental health. Stay with us. Welcome back, and we are continuing our discussion with psychologist Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein about really the damaging effects of social media on the mental health of our youngsters, of our children. And are you seeing, Dr. Rubenstein, people that you're treating or that other mental health experts are treating for problematic social media use, excessive social media use?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely becoming one of the a big issue that mental health clinicians are seeing, and it's just increasing, and really causing issues that are being exacerbated by being isolated from doing things that you would normally do offline because of the time you're spending online.
How can a parent know, or even a teenager or a young person, him or herself, know whether social media is taking over?
I think really being open about it, communicating, documenting, right? You can see how much time you're spending on these on your phone. Parents should be connected to all of this. Your kids won't like it, and that's okay. I think starting as early as possible to make that the norm of this is just the way it's going to be, that we will be involved, in the social media, in your social media use, and as they get older and you build trust, you can kind of lean back a little bit, just like you would in normal social relationships, right? Like when you start with your kids when they're younger, you're going to their play dates with them, you're doing all of this. It's the same thing. You kind of need to build that trust and help them to learn the way to navigate. And so I really encourage parents to be involved and to be active and to take the time to learn what their kids are on, what they don't want their kids on. Create your own account as a parent. Learn from a first person perspective what it feels like and what it is like. Because if you don't know, it's very hard to communicate with your child.
So recently, the Surgeon General said he thinks 13 years old, which is sort of like the standard of social media use, he thinks that's actually too young. What age should parents start allowing their children to use social media?
It's a complicated question because what happens too is that some friend groups will start using it, and so kids will be very isolated if they're not using it for with their friends, and then will become isolated from them offline because on they're talking about what they talked about last night online, and so it can be somewhat isolating. So it's a case by case basis. I think 13 in general is what the standard is. You have to look at your child though and really examine together, like, are they ready? And really dip your toe in very slowly. So it doesn't mean 13, let it go. You can just have access to every social media app you want. More so, let's start with one. Let's start with do it in the open. Let's do it together. And you can talk to your friends on there in a specific way. Maybe it's, 5 people that you talk to, but do it in a very controlled way while the kid learns and while you get to feel a sense of comfort, but be a part of it. So it's not just hand over, a tablet when they are 13.
And I remember when my children were teenagers, there wasn't social media at that time. They're grown now. But I remember talking to their friends' parents all the time
Yeah.
about, and we went comparing notes about what we would let them do, what the bedtimes were, when can they call each other. I mean, do you advocate talking to your children's friends' parents and sort of all getting together about what you're going to allow and not allow?
I do. I think that is major, and I think that'd be very helpful. And it's a conversation you want to approach gently because this tends to be a very divisive topic. But I think if you approach it more so as there's no judgment, we're not judging, if your child is already on social media or whatnot, that is your choice. But as a friend group, like how do we want them to operate, in terms of their friendships on social media? And having an open conversation, just so you know at least where everyone else stands. And even if you can't get others to go to, the same side as you or what you want, understand. You want to know what is happening rather than being blind to the reality of it. And then figuring out the game plan and trying to look for, a middle ground with the other parents. So looking for a way to compromise and make it work so that your kid isn't completely, left out.
So really, you don't really advocate on children going cold turkey or parents forcing their children to go cold turkey, right?
I don't. I don't think it's the best strategy. I think it is a little it can be very harsh to the child. I think, is it like a punishment or something like that? If it's short term, I think that's different. But I think right now the norm, it's you could actually, create more harm than not if you do go completely cold turkey and take away that avenue. Because I think there are benefits of it. And I think talking to your kids and finding out what is the goal of social media, what do they get from it? What lights them up when they're on it? What do they enjoy? Avoiding the doom scroll, really talking about all of this with them.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic information. And we're going to take another break and be right back with psychologist Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein to talk about what parents can do to help their children avoid the pitfalls of social media. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking with psychologist Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein about what parents can do to help their children avoid some of the dangers of social media. And really, the first thing you said was parents need to know what their children are doing, what they're looking at, what they're involved in. And that's kind of a place where many parents are like, how do I do that? And because parents don't usually know as much about social media or even the internet as their children.
Yeah, so it's going online and learning. And there are so many ways to learn. Download the app. The only way that you really will learn is by actually using it. So I really encourage the parents to use the apps that their kids are using. Come up with a fake profile, just do a silly, just kind of get your feel, move around it, look at it, understand it, so that when they're saying something, you get what that means versus just kind of creating that disconnection, because information is very powerful and your children will actually listen if you know what you're talking about, versus it's, an all or nothing mentality of like, it's all bad, or, okay, I'm okay with you doing this part of it, but not this part of it. So I think that's really key, is to understand the social media that they're using and the different ways they can use it, and then really help them to understand that what they are posting and sharing it's not just on their computer. And I think that's a very hard concept for kids to understand. And so something that I really recommend doing is to make it more concrete for kids, because they have a hard time visualizing this. So print out some of the posts maybe that they want to post on social media, or some of the interactions, print it out, let them see it in like off the computer, and ask them, would they be okay with, family members seeing this, with their teachers, and kind of get that feel of like, oh, this isn't just for 3 people. Like, this is actually in the public. And this is, there are ways to understand that's beyond just the computer screen. So make it as tangible as possible, have conversations, get really creative about it. And when they're using social media at first, I really recommend doing it in like your family, community spaces. So like your family room or the dining room table, if that's where they're, you have a tablet for them to use so that you can check in and see what they're doing. And that's the place where you build the trust, and be open about that you need to build the trust. This is a whole new thing that they're doing, a new way of interacting, and you need to build trust together. And it's going to take some time to do that, but you're going to do it together. And I think that's really, it could be a way to connect with your child rather than push them away. Because I think what happens when social media becomes so big is parents feel like there's a divide between them and their child. And so rather than letting that divide exist, walk towards it rather than kind of going in the opposite direction.
So where do you, I hear you when you say, let's talk about this, let's create open communication. It seems like that's the most important thing. But do you ever draw any boundaries and say, okay, you can't have your phone at night, you can't go into a locked bathroom? What kind of boundaries do you recommend?
Oh, yeah. So I think especially as you build that, is you can't, figuring out how many hours you're allowing or how much time you're allowing. If it's 30 minutes, or if it's an hour on the weekends, like figuring out what you are comfortable with, starting at the low end, starting where you feel like, okay, I'm okay with this. And it's time that I can sit there, do something next to my child, and I'm comfortable with it. But really set those expectations up and know that you can change them. You are the parent. Your number one job is to keep your child safe. You can change the boundaries as you go, as you learn. Just be open about that. Your child's going to have emotions about that. Don't let their emotions dictate what you do. So know that they'll have emotions, know that you can handle the emotions, that you can sit with them, you can understand the emotions, you can deal with it, but that stay firm and that your number one job is to keep them safe, and to set those limits and to change them if necessary, but be open about it because with anything, there has to be limits.
All right. All right. We're going to take one final break and be right back
Okay.
with psychologist Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein about the impact of social media on our young children's mental health. And Dr. Rubenstein, we're running out of time. Any final words on this? We could go on for hours, obviously. Any final words regarding this topic?
Trust your gut. Trust your gut as a parent, and you know your child best more than any professional or any of the guidelines. And really, if you usually go towards the more conservative route, you can always make it. You can always loosen it up, but start where you feel most comfortable and go from there. Don't give in to the peer pressure. And focus on just keeping your children safe the best that you can. You'll make mistakes. That is okay. We all do. And you'll kind of course correct as you go.
Dr. Rubenstein, we thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This is such an emotional and such an important topic for us. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I post daily on Instagram. So I post a lot of just information, helpful tips at Carolyn Rubenstein, PhD. Also, my website is carolynrubenstein.com, and I have a course on there that I just released called Perfectly Human. That's all about pretty much this: setting boundaries, how to deal with the emotions of being human, of being a parent, navigating, and keeping our mental health okay while we do it.
Well, this is a wonderful topic and so many more resources for people to delve into. Once again, Dr. Carolyn Rubenstein, the book is Perseverance: How Young People Turn Fear into Hope and How They Can Teach Us to Do the Same. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for tuning in to this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.